Picture the eastern shore of the Dead Sea, a high, dry plateau, a deep canyon cutting to the water. Today, it's Wadi Mujib. Almost 3,000 years ago, that cliff country was a small, stubborn kingdom. Its people called themselves Moabites. You meet them in the Bible. You meet their king on a black stone dug up in modern Jordan. And then poof, the nation is gone. So who were the Moabites? Where did they go? Why did they disappear? And is this a real history or just a legend? Stick with me. In the next few minutes, you'll hear the Moabites speak in their own words, carved in rock. You'll see how geography shaped a kingdom, why a single god stood at the center of their identity, and how empires erased the name Moab without erasing the people. First, the map. Moab sat east of the Dead Sea, roughly central Jordan today. A steppe rises from the shoreline to farm country, grain fields, vineyards, olive groves. The Arnon River, the modern Wadi Mujib, often marked the northern limit. Their political heartland was around Dibon today. From that ridge, they watched caravans on the King's Highway, the old north-south road linking Damascus with the Red Sea. Geography gave Moab opportunity and pressure. To the north were the Ammonites, to the south, Edom, across the Dead Sea to the west, Israel and Judah. In this narrow hallway of land, neighbors were never far, and peace never lasted long. Open the Hebrew Bible, and you get an origin story. Moab as the son of Lot, Abraham's nephew. It isn't a DNA test. It's an ancient way of explaining relationships between peoples. The message is simple. Israel and Moab are kin, but not the same. That tension, family and rivalry, sets the tone for many later stories. When do we meet Moab in history? You can cross-check. By the early 1st millennium BCE, small chiefdoms east of the Dead Sea had settled into kingdoms. The sharpest spotlight is the 9th century BCE, with a king named Mesha. We know Mesha not only from the Bible, but from his own bragging, a 30-plus line inscription carved into stone, known as the Mesha Stele. It's one of the great inscriptions of the ancient Levant, because it talks about the same events you read in 2 Kings, but from the Moabite point of view. Here's the quick version. Moab had been under the thumb of the northern kingdom of Israel, ruled by the dynasty of Omri and Ahab. Mesha says Chemosh, the national god of Moab, got angry with his land, let Israel dominate for a while, and then turned back in favor. Mesha rebels, defeats Israel in several towns, builds fortresses, digs reservoirs, and expands. The biblical writers tell it differently from the other side. Israel, Judah, and Edom march in to crush the rebellion. Mesha, desperate, sacrifices his son on the city wall, and the campaign collapses. The 2 versions disagree on who won, but they agree on this. Moab was real, organized, and dangerous when cornered. That stone tells us more than a war story. It shows the Moabite language. If you can read biblical Hebrew, you can read most Moabite. Same alphabet, similar grammar, names that feel familiar but with their own flavor, especially the name of their god. Where people in Judah loved names ending with Yahu, Moabites loved Chemosh. You meet people like Chemosh Yati and Chemosh Melech. The language puts Moab firmly in the West Semitic Canaanite family, cousins to Hebrew and Phoenician. What about religion? At the center stood Chemosh. The Stele credits Chemosh with victories and commands. The Bible talks about hilltop shrines for Chemosh and treats him as a rival to Israel's God. You also catch a glimpse of Ashtar Chemosh, maybe a title or a pairing with a goddess. Worship likely meant offerings at high places, vows before battles, and in extreme crisis, grim rites. The story of a crown prince sacrificed on the city wall is shocking now, but in that world it sent a clear message. The king would risk everything to force divine favor. Now zoom out to daily life. The canyons are wild, but the tableland above is farm country. Barley and wheat, grapes for wine, olives for oil. Sheep and goats on the edges where you are just drain with share. Rain falls in bursts so people trapped it in cisterns and reservoirs. When Mesha boasts about digging reservoirs, he's not bragging about a fancy pond, he's bragging about life support. Archaeology at Diban and nearby sites shows fortification lines, public works, and houses along narrow streets. Pottery styles fit the Iron Age in Transjordan, familiar shapes with local twists. It's not a museum full of treasures, it's a working landscape. Moab didn't live alone. Neighbors shaped its fate. Israel to the west wanted control of the plateau because it sat on the caravan lifeline. Ammon to the north and Edom to the south wanted the same. And then there were the big boys, Assyria first, then Babylon. That's the backdrop after Mesha. In the 8th and 7th centuries BCE, Assyrian kings tightened the screw on the Levant. Records from their capitals list Moab among the states paying tribute. The names of Moabite rulers in those lists carry Chemosh in them, another clue that the Moab on the tablets is the Moab on the ground. Under Assyria, Moab survived by bowing and paying. It kept its identity but lost freedom of action. Everything shifts in the early 6th century BCE when Babylon replaces Assyria. The southern Levant takes hit after hit. Judah falls in 586 BCE, and its elite is exiled. Moab doesn't make dramatic headlines in our sources, but silence is telling. Babylonian power hammered the region. People moved. Settlements shrank or shifted. The Moabite kingdom, as a political state, fades out around this time. You still find the land, you still find farmers and herders. You don't find a Moabite king. So where did the Moabites go? They didn't evaporate. They blended. Over the next centuries, the eastern plateau sees new powers rise, most famously the Nabataeans, Arab traders who built Petra to the south and controlled desert routes. Under the Persian Empire, and then the Greeks and Romans, the region is reorganized and folded into larger provinces. The geographic label, Moab, lingers in some writings. The ethnic label slips away. By Hellenistic and Roman times, locals speak varieties of Aramaic, later Arabic, and some Greek and Latin in cities. They marry across old lines. Their gods change names. Chemosh becomes a memory. The nation is gone, not because of one doomsday night, but because centuries of empire, trade, migration, and intermarriage turned hard borders into soft gradients. If you're thinking, but wait, Ruth the Moabite, you're on it. The Book of Ruth sets its tale earlier, in the time of the judges, and it's a tight story about loyalty and belonging. Ruth, a Moabite woman, marries into an Israelite family and becomes the great-grandmother of King David. Can we verify the personal details? No. But the story reveals something true about life across the Dead Sea. Families crossed borders, love and law mixed, and identity could stretch wider than politics. Even when the kingdoms fought, the people on the ground weren't sealed behind walls. Let's pause and test the big question. Myth or real? The Moabites are not a mirage. We have their land. We have their language. We have their king's boast in stone. We have neighboring empires listing them and biblical writers wrestling with them. As with any ancient people, some stories are wrapped in theology, and origin tales speak in the language of kinship myths. But the core, Moab as a real kingdom in the Iron Age, is solid. What were the flashpoints with Israel and Judah? There are many. In Judges, a Moabite king named Eglon oppresses Israel until a left-handed assassin named Ehud kills him. In the time of David, Moab and Israel fight, pause, and clash again. Later, as we saw, Moab pays Israel under Omri's dynasty and then revolts under Mesha. The prophets deliver oracles against Moab's pride, and then imagine restoration. Even after the kingdom falls, centuries later, Judean leaders worry about intermarriage with Moabites, not because Moab is a military threat, but because identity boundaries remain a live question in a world rearranged by empires. These texts aren't neutral, they have points to make, but they fit the kind of friction you'd expect between close neighbors. Now, let's open that stone. Imagine a smooth black slab with 30+ lines in a script that looks like Hebrew. It begins, "I am Mesha, son of Chemosh Yati, king of Moab, the Dibonite." He says Chemosh handed lands to Israel when angry, then returned them when pleased. He lists towns, Ataroth, Nebo, Jahaz, says he rebuilt them, repopulated them, and dedicated them to Chemosh. He brags about reservoirs he dug and roads he improved. And he describes, in blunt ancient war style, how he took enemy sacred vessels and dragged them before Chemosh. Strip away the bravado and you get a tour of Moab's priorities: water, walls, roads, and worship. Did Moab leave anything else? A handful of small inscriptions and seals turn up. Excavations at places like Diban and Herbert Ataroz fill in details. Fortifications, a temple, layers of ash from conflict, and local pottery. It's not full biography, it's a sketchbook with enough pages to recognize the face. Combine that with Israelite, Assyrian, and later references, and the outline holds. Let's talk scale. People hear kingdom and imagine millions. Moab was small. Think tens of thousands of people, not millions. A few main towns and lots of villages. That scale matters because it explains how a nation can disappear. You don't need mass death to erase a small identity. You need 2 or 3 centuries of pressure and pull, taxes to far-off kings, sons hired as caravan guards, daughters married into neighboring clans, young men chasing work in bigger towns, and new rulers offering new loyalties. By the time Greek names hit the map and Nabataean merchants run the trade routes, calling yourself Moabite isn't a ticket to anything, it's a memory. What became of the land after the name faded? In the Hellenistic era, the plateau east of the Dead Sea stayed strategic. Cities got Greek names. Later, under Rome, the region folded into bigger provinces and districts. You'll see a name like Areopolis for Rabbath, Moab. Christianity arrived and mapped the landscape with new sacred sites. Mount Nebo, for example, layered on older memories. The bones of Moab's towns stayed in place, reused and remodeled. Farmers still farmed, shepherds still moved flocks. The old name glowed faintly under later layers, like an older line of ink under a scraped parchment. But the living nation had passed. So, clean answers to the headline questions. Who were the Moabites? A West Semitic people on the east side of the Dead Sea, speaking a language close to Hebrew centered around Dibon, with Chemosh as their national god, organized as a small kingdom that rose to prominence in the 9th century BCE under King Mesha. Where did they go? They didn't vanish overnight. Their kingdom collapsed amid 6th century BCE upheavals. Over the following centuries, they were absorbed into larger regional populations under Persian, Hellenistic, Nabataean, and Roman rule. The geographic label lingered, the ethnic one faded. Why did they disappear? Because small kingdoms rarely survive repeated waves of empire. Tribute, war, migration, intermarriage, and shifting trade routes eroded the reasons to maintain a separate identity. New powers demanded new loyalties. Old labels lost their bite. When did this happen? The state took shape by the 10th to 9th centuries BCE, hit its stride under Mesha in the 9th, survived as a tributary under Assyria in the 8th and 7th, and was effectively gone as a sovereign entity by the early to mid-6th century BCE. By the Hellenistic period, the ethnic name was mostly a memory, even if the land name survived. Is it a myth? No, the Moabites are well attested. Biblical texts, Assyrian lists, archaeology, and most vividly, their own inscription. Like many ancient peoples, their story blends history, theology, and memory. But the nation itself is no legend. Now let's add one more human thread, Ruth the Moabite. Her story is short and sharp: famine, migration, loss, loyalty. Where you go, I will go. She crosses from Moab into Judah, and generations later, her descendant is David, Israel's great king. Whether every detail is historical isn't the point here. The point is what the story remembers. Borders are lines people can cross. Enemies on paper still marry, trade, and share fields. Even in ages of kings and empires, identity is lived one household at a time. So if you stand today on the ridge above Deban and look west across the Dead Sea, you can imagine the old kingdom in the shape of the land. The canyons are still there. The wind still rips at the grass. Somewhere underfoot are the stones Mesha stacked, the cisterns he dug, and the streets his people walked. The Moabites may be gone as a nation, but they left fingerprints you can still trace. Names in an inscription, a scar of a wall, a place where a story happens. That's the story of the Moabites, a small people in a hard landscape, remembered because they sat next to bigger neighbors who wrote about them, and because one of their own kings carved his side of the story in stone. Not a myth. A real chapter of the ancient Middle East, with a beginning you can point to, and a legacy that survives in the land and in the stories we still tell. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, hit like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend. We'll see you in the next episode.